Good morning once again, everybody. This is Michael from Spades Consulting, and we are going to talk about fifth generational warfare. A different topic. Okay. So, what the hell is fifth generational warfare? Essentially, it is focusing on defeating your enemy using auxiliary circumstances. So, from the obvious example, from the Chinese example, it essentially follows the strategy of be like water. Okay. Now, this generally act as the water is more Chinese proverb in terms of how to be successful and how to defeat nearly any enemy. You don't want to be rock. You want to be water because the water persists. The water is constantly ebbing and flowing. It just exists. But in the process of ebbing and flowing, it's wearing away at the rocks, turning the rocks into sand over time until eventually all of the rock is sand and the water stands dominant. Okay? This has been the Chinese strategy for the most part to defeat the United States. And you should know fifth generation warfare because you're in it. This is one thing that has especially ticked quite a few boxes as I've thought about it more and more. But the fact that things have not gone back to normal since 2020 is a perfect example of the fact that we are in fifth generational warfare. Essentially, imagine this. Imagine a dry lake bed. Okay? It's been dry for quite a long time. You provide these ample, easy circumstances. Okay? So, obviously, it's been dry for a while. The chances of it filling up again are fairly low. Eventually, the American people are going to move in with their concrete slabs and they're going to start laying foundations for buildings and houses. Okay, meanwhile, remember, they're still in the ancient riverbed or the ancient lake. Okay, so you let them build up and then you slowly start to infiltrate. And eventually, the formerly ancient lake bed starts to fill up with water again. That water, of course, doesn't necessarily, in small volumes, doesn't necessarily do too much to the foundation of this society, of this system, of this structure. Doesn't necessarily affect it at first. It takes time. It sits there. It saturates the concrete. Now, if enough water came in, you might actually be able to get under there and generate enough hydraulic force to lift the foundation. But that's in a drastic circumstance. You created the ample targeting zone. Okay? And then you fill it up with more water. Now, as the water gets into concrete, what ends up happening is the concrete strengthens with the water around it. And it becomes more brittle. So immediately it might not come off as a problem. You continue to hit it with water. And eventually, over time, the rigidity increases. Maybe you even get some penetration under the foundation. Regardless, after multiple cycles of rains, you harden the foundation and eventually cracks start to form. Okay? Now it's a long process, it's a protracted process. But that's how you win in fifth generational warfare. A slow, steady pressure. The cracks begin, and the water infiltrates deeper through the cracks, spreading this hardening ability to more areas, more surfaces in the concrete. Eventually, the concrete becomes so hard and so brittle that it's cracked by nearly anything. And the minute fissures, the minute cracks slowly become big ones. And then the foundation fails, and everything built above it collapses back down into the sands. That's how you win fifth generational warfare. You win it by providing once in a lifetime perfect opportunities to American and Western businesses to send all of their factories overseas. We'll be the bastion of your dreams. You'll be able to save a fortune by throwing your own natural workforces under the bus. Send us all your machines. We'll give you cheap labor. We will produce, we don't even have labor standards. You need electricity? Boom, you got it. We just put up another coal plant last week. You need labor? We have tons of that. Just give us your machines. Show us how to make what you make. Give us your IP. We swear we're only going to use it to produce your products. And slowly over time, because the circumstances were very beneficial without seeing the back end of that benefit necessarily, every American company and corporation sent their jobs overseas and sent their machinery overseas, whilst the majority of the workforce in the United States was thrown to lower quality labor jobs and a few jobs for college educates, which they borrowed money in order to get their degrees, which helped stimulate the economy and prop up the retirement plans for the boomer professors. And we became an economy based on the hope that we would replace the low skill manufacturing jobs that boomers put a roof over their head, 2 cars in the garage, and 8 kids through college on. And we will replace those jobs with high skill, high quality jobs of the future. Until the boomers in charge realized that they could also outsource all of those jobs to the now increasingly more advanced symbiote country. So the offshore outsourcing began again, and more of the high skill jobs that Americans were supposed to train and go for went overseas, leaving more and more Americans in a position where they became a burden on the welfare state. And in their despair for their inability to attain the previous levels of wealth of their parents and to grow beyond that, they began to engage in deaths of despair, where they increasingly used more narcotic drugs until it slowly killed most of them. Meanwhile, as China pumped in the precursors and materials to create the same drugs that the American working class would take in order to soothe the crippling losses as a direct consequence of their victory. Knowing how to produce everything, they could then scale to the rest of the world, selling the same electrical equipment to every country, the same networking equipment to every country, the same water purification systems to every country, the same everything to every country, built to an American corporate standard. Now, given you also made a large chunk of the personal computers and technology for the American market. Of course, they made a fortune that they saved on paying foreign labor versus domestic. You also got to learn all the back doors that the three-letter agencies and foreign mm, subversive agencies used in order to keep tabs on their local populations, and you realize that having control of the hardware temporarily meant that you can insert your own backdoors even deeper ingrained than the deep states. You then ship this equipment all over the world to desperate, hungry markets for cheap electronics. And over time, you saturated the world with this high quality junk. And the people willingly accepted it because, in return for no manufacturing jobs, they could at the very least drug themselves with social media and internet porn. Being China right now, you are in the position that you've so thoroughly saturated the world with your goods and with your back doors. You now have the ability to shut off any system anywhere that you want. If you want to shut down the electrical grid, you can do it. If you wanted to shut down all networking devices, you can do it. You have backdoors into every router. You have backdoors into every computer. You have access to all of the top secret information, even if it's air gapped. All of the top secret information. And then on top of it, you also have some of the highest skilled technical advisors and students taking advantage of visa programs so you can insert agents for the Communist Party all throughout the symbiote country. From the position of China, they have people everywhere, all throughout every level of Western society. They have backdoors to take out the power grid, the internet, networking devices, every device in the United States. They could remotely hijack any critical structure. They can shut down all the bridges. They can fuck with the traffic signals. They also produce all of the parts that are used to repair the emergency services vehicles. This is fifth generational warfare. Don't you think it's odd? However, since 2020, conveniently, there's been more and more outages when it comes to the web infrastructure, and how parts quality conveniently has been falling off a cliff recently. Now, a certain amount of this is, of course, corporates trying to cut costs and save even more money to pad their bottom lines and maybe even pay off their corporate debt. Hmm. But there's also another idea that the decline in quality is not a plan by the American corporations, but that the decline of quality is a weapon. Because if China makes nearly all the parts for the American repair industry for automotive, you can literally shut down the entire logistics system by pumping out a whole lot of low quality or no quality repair parts, especially if those parts are back ordered 6 to 14 months. So not only do you have people waiting, but in addition to waiting, which puts a massive strain on the normal worker's ability to get to work and the ability to move materials around and the ability to move people from a very bad circumstance to a hospital should they need medical assistance, or the ability to send police if they're in danger, or the ability to put out house fires if their house catches fire because the fire truck can't run. They got us by the balls. Think about it. They have the ability, not only do they have people on the ground, but they also have routes into every system and subsystem, critical and non critical, throughout the entirety of the United States, and people welcomed it openly. Not expecting the ulterior motive. Be like water. Persist. Now I'm going to take a break from how I've been getting this message across just to, you know, float around the topic a little bit. They have done brilliantly with this. I cannot take that away from them. They have been absolutely brilliant. It is incredible what they've managed to do. They gave American corporations exactly what they wanted, and they used it to their advantage. Now, given the population paid the price, excessively long work hours, zero health and safety, they put their workforce through hell. But in return for it, they've got the entire United States bugged. And with the push of a couple buttons on a keyboard, they could flip every switch and cause endless chaos throughout any system they want in the American or Western economies. Fifth generational warfare is not about direct power, it's about indirect power. All right, much like an army runs on its stomach. Well, if you can't get the food to your army is going to starve. If you can't arm the army, your army is going to starve. Okay? Well, not necessarily starve in that case, but, you get the point. Again, it's very late. I'm quite tired, but we're getting through this regardless. An army with no cannonballs has no artillery. An army that's technicals are downweighting on parts is just a ground force. If all of your trucks fall apart, oh, there goes your mobile infantry. That's fifth generational warfare, but it goes deeper. Because 2020, a possible lab leak, that's also fifth generation warfare. You can't necessarily point the finger directly because there are two leading narratives. Disinformation is also a key part. It's more of a war of influence. Okay? You can influence and destabilize structures with fifth generational warfare. You don't need to attack the castle directly. You just have to make sure that water infiltrates the ground under the castle. Oh, it's on bedrock? Okay. There are other ways. There are always other ways. Apologies. Fifth generational warfare is about maximum passivity. You don't directly engage your target. You hit them on every flank they didn't know they had. By default, most companies operated from the mindset that they were playing against and that they were doing business with a foreign country that didn't have ulterior motives. They operated from the mindset that maybe their intellectual property would be protected. And they're so brain dead and inefficient that they couldn't look past the saving $1 per unit as potentially creating a problem for the company in the long run, because you hand over the IP on how to make a window unit air conditioner, and then all of a sudden there is another brand with a goofy name that's built almost identical to how you requested yours would be built, and they're undercutting you by $50 because their costs are much lower than the cost of the American corporation who has many other people to pay off. Now, I could talk more about how the boomers fucked up the economy and put this country um, on a fast track to an early grave. I could do that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to talk about the brilliance of the Chinese strategy because it is brilliant. And an important note, if you were to knock out power to the United States for, I think it was a month. Oh, no, it was probably the first year. 98% of the American population would die within a year without power. The cities would be anarchy after a week of no food deliveries. It does not take much to destabilize the system. You look at something like the water supplies for a city, because cities obviously make the richest, juiciest targets in general. How the hell do you take over a city? You go after its water supply. What happens if you, well, what if you didn't actually have to go after the water supply? Think about that. Because the Chinese literally don't have to. The water supply in cities like New York are so full of estrogens and dissolved narcotics that people who actually live, it's almost like the movie, oh God, what was it? I don't even know if you could really call it a movie, but it was, I think it was My Dinner with Andre. Give me 1 second here. Was that it? Oh, yeah, yeah. 1981. My Dinner with Andre. It's almost like that. The fact that people have built the cities and the cities have become concentration camps for the builders of the city who take pride in the city that they don't realize is their prison, that they're trapped there. But when you take into account just the amount of estrogen and drugs in the water supply in New York, because you can't filter it all out, anybody who drinks the public water is being dosed in terms that will turn them into essentially neurotic pussies. There's no nicer way to say it. You could say effeminate. Uh, I suppose we'll go with that. Um, yeah, the Chinese don't have to lift a finger, to be honest. Like the idea of actually using any of the tools and mechanisms that you could use for fifth generational warfare, they don't even have to. The best part of the strategy is they don't have to lift a finger. We'll destroy ourselves. And we have been. Every level of society in the Western countries, we've been destroying ourselves. And then on top of it, you have the quote unquote leadership class, the club. All of a sudden, they're worried about birth rates now. Why? Because they've realized that they can't use immigration to flood the Western countries with all of these people because they won't integrate. And not only are they not going to get the cheap labor that they wanted to take care of the boomers primarily, but to do all of the, who's going to pick the fruit? Who's going to wax and clean my floors? Who's going to do my laundry? Okay. They realize that they're not going to get that from the immigrants. They'll definitely bump up the population rates, but the majority of the migrants that they have been able to get into the Western countries come from countries where the women don't work. And they mostly end up leeching off the welfare state. And now they can't square the circle anymore. They believe that they could just pick up and actually, that's a good side note. Ford, oh yeah, we're going to fire all of our engineers and we're going to outsource the planning and design to Mexico to some Mexican engineers. And all of a sudden, 2020 on, all of the newer Ford vehicles are just shit. They're just complete shit. And they're going to act surprised. The quote unquote leadership class has realized that they've got a real problem on their hands. They have to actually improve the value of their local populations. They have to actually, reward people for participating and doing right and doing well in the society. And they somehow have to pull essentially the West, when you look at it from that perspective, the leadership class essentially needs fascism in the West so they can justify something that you'd only get in a more of a science fiction horror novel where you end up with a fascistic state and state mandated breeding programs. They need more English speaking slaves at the bottom in order to prop up the systems that they're in charge of. It's an interesting circumstance. But back to the point. The best part of fifth generational warfare is you don't actually have to lift a finger. Whoever you are up against, whoever your enemy is in fifth generational warfare, they destroy themselves long before you ever have to think about lifting a cover and pressing a big red button. You look at the West as a whole, and it has been destroying itself with DEI and all of these luxury beliefs. Meanwhile, its local economic capacity has been rotting out. Its ability to produce anything has been completely curtailed. Outside of religious orders and religious sects, just about everything is controlled by corporations, and every corporation, because of the profit motive and because of the need to serve shareholders above anyone else, has sold out everything possible in order to save as much as possible in order to grow their bottom line earnings, bottom and top line earnings. It's an interesting predicament, and it's not curable. That's the thing. Even, for the boomers who are very pro Orange Man can't fix this. No matter how hard he tries, he can't fix this. Because these problems have become ingrained, they've become entrenched, and after multiple decades of screwing over people and taking away all of the incentives to try, there's no incentive to right the ship. The United States, along with the wider West, is going into the iceberg. And it's not going to be a graze. It's going head on. Full bore. Can't stop, won't stop. And it's interesting, being one of the few people who for years has seen this coming. Just to know that, good God, I've been right. I've been right. And now all that's left is defensive strategies, which is why Spades Consulting is a thing. Because now I should put this out that Spades is not a dirty scheme. The idea behind Spades is to actually try to help as many people as I possibly can before the system goes down. Okay, whichever way it goes down first. That doesn't matter. Ideally, I would like to see as many people as possible be in a better position in life and be better positioned for the massive, massive amount of changes that are coming. That's why Spades is a thing. It's also why Spades is also a way that I can hopefully employ all of the good people and good friends that I've made over the many years I've been alive so far. That is a goal too. Regardless, if you're interested in personal or business consulting, stop by spadesconsulting.com. If you're interested in some more free content, you can have a look at Substack. There is an optional subscription. I believe the rate is $5 a month. But in return for it, if you subscribe to it, there is always going to be every month a higher value discount code for paid subscribers. And with that, I'll end it here. You guys have a good one. Take care of yourselves. It's a wild world.